Imagine you're sitting by the window on an airplane. You lean your head against the wall, look outside, and notice something you've seen your entire life, but probably never questioned. The window is small, much smaller than the wall around it, and it isn't square. It isn't even rectangular. It's rounded, carefully, intentionally. And once you notice that, a strange question appears. Airplanes are huge machines. They carry hundreds of people. They cross oceans. So why are the windows so small? And why are they curved instead of sharp and straight? It feels like a design choice. Maybe for comfort, maybe for style. But here's the surprising part. Those windows are not small and rounded because designers wanted them that way. They're small and rounded because at one point airplanes were literally tearing themselves apart. And once you understand what went wrong, the shape of every airplane window suddenly makes perfect sense. If you enjoy uncovering the hidden logic behind everyday things, take a second to like the video and subscribe. Because today, we're uncovering the real reason airplane windows look the way they do. At first, airplanes didn't look like this. In the early days of commercial aviation, planes were closer to flying buses. They flew lower, slower, and under far less stress. Cabins were not highly pressurized. And windows? They were often square or rectangular, just like the ones in trains and ships. It seemed logical. Straight edges were easier to cut, easier to frame, easier to install, and for a while everything worked. Then airplanes started flying higher, much higher. As jet engines improved, planes climbed above weather, turbulence, and clouds. But with altitude came a new problem: air pressure. At cruising altitude, the air outside the plane is thin, too thin for humans to breathe. So cabins had to be pressurized. Inside the plane, the air pressure pushes outward, constantly, relentlessly. Every square inch of the fuselage feels that force, and this is where shapes begin to matter. Sharp corners are dangerous. When pressure pushes against a surface, it concentrates stress at corners and edges. The sharper the corner, the higher the stress. Over time, tiny cracks can form. Invisible at first, growing slowly with every flight. Most people never notice them, until something catastrophic happens. In the early 1950s, a new airplane entered service, the de Havilland Comet. It was the world's first commercial jet airliner. It was faster, smoother, and more advanced than anything before it. It also had large, square windows. At first, everything seemed fine. Then, after several flights, planes began to fail mid-air. Not because of engines, not because of pilot error. The fuselage itself was breaking apart. Investigators eventually discovered the cause: metal fatigue. The repeated pressurization and depressurization of the cabin was causing microscopic cracks to form at the corners of the square windows. Those cracks grew, flight after flight, until one day the structure could no longer hold. The lesson was brutal but clear. Corners are weak points. So engineers changed the design. Windows became smaller and, more importantly, rounded. A rounded window spreads stress evenly. There are no sharp points for pressure to focus on. Instead of forcing stress into corners, the force flows smoothly around the frame. This single change dramatically improved safety, and it quietly rewrote the rules of aircraft design. But window shape isn't the only reason they're small. There's another factor most people don't consider. Every window is a hole, and in aviation, holes are a problem. A solid fuselage is strong. A fuselage full of openings is not. The larger the window, the more structure you have to remove. The more reinforcement you need to add back in. That means extra weight, and in aviation, weight is everything. More weight means more fuel. More fuel means higher costs. Higher costs mean fewer flights and more expensive tickets. So engineers aim for the smallest window that still feels acceptable to passengers. Big enough to let in light. Big enough to see outside, but not big enough to compromise strength. This is why airplane windows feel smaller than you expect. They're not designed for the view. They're designed to survive pressure, altitude, and time. And once this design proved itself, it never went away. But here's where most people get confused. They assume modern materials could change this. And in theory, they could. So why don't we have giant airplane windows today? That question leads to an even deeper truth about how engineering decisions stick around. And that's where the story gets really interesting. So if rounded windows are safer and small windows are stronger, why hasn't modern technology changed this? After all, airplanes today use advanced aluminum alloys, composites, and carbon fiber. Materials that are lighter, stronger, and more flexible than anything engineers had in the 1950s. In theory, we could make airplane windows larger. But engineering isn't about what's possible. It's about what's worth the risk. Because pressure never stops. Every flight puts the fuselage through a cycle. Pressurized on the way up, depressurized on the way down, thousands of times over an airplane's lifetime. Even the best materials fatigue. So engineers don't ask, can we make it bigger? They ask, how small can it be and still work? Smaller windows mean less stress, less reinforcement, less weight, and weight is still the enemy. A heavier plane burns more fuel. Burning more fuel raises costs. Higher costs mean higher ticket prices. So, unless bigger windows offer a huge benefit, they're not worth it. And for most passengers, the current size is acceptable. That's another pattern you'll start noticing everywhere. Design doesn't aim for perfection. It aims for good enough. Now, here's something most people don't realize. Those rounded windows aren't actually perfect circles. They're carefully engineered shapes, often closer to ovals or rounded rectangles. The curvature is tuned to spread stress as evenly as possible while still fitting the interior wall panels and seating layout. Even the thickness of the window matters. Airplane windows are not a single pane of glass. They're made of multiple layers. One structural outer pane that holds pressure. One or more inner panes for insulation and safety. And a tiny bleed hole that equalizes pressure between layers. That little hole you sometimes see at the bottom of the window, it's not a defect. It's there on purpose. Its job is to make sure pressure is applied to the strongest layer, not the one closest to your face. Everything about that window is intentional. Even the size helps control temperature, noise, and condensation. A larger window would let in more heat from the sun, more cold from high altitudes, more noise from outside airflow. So the window quietly solves multiple problems at once. This is why airplane design changes so slowly. Once a solution proves safe, efficient, and predictable, it becomes locked in. Airplanes are certified around these designs. Pilots are trained with them. Maintenance schedules depend on them. Changing something as simple as a window shape would ripple through the entire system. And unless there's a strong reason, no one wants to touch a system that already works. That's why, decades later, airplane windows still look almost the same. Not because engineers lack imagination, but because they remember what happens when imagination ignores physics. So the next time you sit by the window on a flight, pressed against that curved wall, looking through a surprisingly small opening, remember what you're really seeing. You're seeing lessons learned the hard way. You're seeing pressure, fatigue, and failure turned into design. A shape chosen not for beauty, but for survival. Because most of the world around you isn't shaped by comfort or style. It's shaped by forces you never see, problems you never experience, and solutions that quietly protect you every day. And that's why the simplest details, like a small rounded window, often carry the most important stories. If this changed the way you look at airplanes, leave a like, subscribe, and share it with someone who flies. Because sometimes the simplest things hide the most misunderstood truths.